How much should we expect to pay for an architect to design your house extension and draw and submit it for planning and building regulations? How do they even calculate their fees if they don't know the cost or the design? And should you even bother with an architect, or just get an architectural draftsperson, surveyor or technician? They must be a fraction of the price, right? Here I'll compare both along with the likely costs to help you decide, and I'll give you my opinion at the end. Let's use this rear house extension as our example on the back of this fairly typical semi-detached home. And let's start with architect's fees first. And as an architect, when I'm starting to estimate a fee for drawing a house extension, I'll sketch out the footprint of the size I think is optimal. It doesn't have to be exact, and since we always work on internal floor area, measuring between the walls, I'll subtract the thickness of what I think the walls will be, since we never include them for area calculations. Here I'll use my previous video on wall types to help me, and I'll guess the walls are around this much. It's working out about 4.6 by 3.4 metres, so around 15.5 square metres of internal floor area. I need to estimate what I think the build cost would be even before any drawings are done, since architects calculate their fees as a percentage of the construction cost. I'll use square metre pricing only to give me a very approximate idea of what I think the construction cost could be, then fix the price regardless of how much the actual agreed future build cost is, so we both know exactly what the fee is going to be. And I do it this way because I can see how frustrating it must be for clients when architects are not clear about fixing their fees, and therefore the client has no budget certainty. It's crazy old-fashioned snobbery by architects, unfortunately. So how do I get my square metre cost rate if I've not got any drawings yet? It's a chicken and egg, right? Well, I can ask on Facebook groups such as this one. I'm a bit wary of these groups since there's a lot of people who sound really confident but actually talk complete nonsense, which is confusing to the novice. But if you're patient and ask the right questions, there are some excellent nuggets by top contributors. There's also the bigger home improvement sites to give you a feel, but they're very generic and you can see the price ranges they're saying here. For square metre pricing, it's not ever going to be exact. It's dependent on inflation, of course, significant for an industry which is so dependent on commodities and raw materials, and geography, since labour rates fluctuate depending on supply and demand. If you're in the UK, for example, London rates would be more expensive than, say, central Scotland rates. Materials, I'd say, are pretty much fixed throughout the country, but delivery to remote areas and labour availabilities are also invisible factors to consider. I imagine it's the same if you're in the United States or in Europe, anywhere in fact where you have a mobile workforce. In the past, I've tried phoning up a local builder and asking them if they have some recent square metre rates they can share, or I might just ask neighbours what they paid. But these days, I'll use my own building rates from projects we've built ourselves, and I'll just guess the variations on inflation and geography based on my own experience. Now, we're talking about the bit before talking to a builder, the costs you need to pay to get your drawings done and your building regulations and planning permissions in place before you get your detailed pricing and start to build. Now, this square metre rate is just to wind and watertight, guttering and drainage, electric and plumbing, and plaster finished shell, and then you add in your estimates for the abnormal and one-off elements, in this case kitchen and fancy finishes. A wind and watertight shell will look pretty much like this space here we did recently. We'll exclude any decking and landscaping, hardwood floor finishes for the sake of simplicity, and here I've got my estimate. Now I've got that, I'll show how I break down my design and my drawing fees, and then before comparing with online and technical drawing services, so you can decide. Now, architects break their fees down into stages like this. I'll charge a fixed cost for measuring a house and drawing up a sketch design, so that way the client or homeowner can have what is in effect a mini feasibility study. And for the measured survey, your house wall thicknesses, construction, position of services, they all need to be noted as I'm walking around the property. And this is different from the survey that a surveyor does. That will be to see what condition the house is in and to assess its value, of course, if you're selling it. If there's an estate agent's report, I'll have a look at that and check the location out on Google Maps. And I'll meet up and go around the home, measure everything, and then draw the house up. And this is usually done in CAD, although there are still a fair few architects drawing up by hand using a T-square drawing board with ink pens on tracing paper, which is exactly how I learned before transitioning into CAD towards the end of my studies. It's a lovely craft to have as a backup and allows me to create quick thumbnail perspectives to help me visualize ideas on the back of an envelope. Software to use will be SketchUp or AutoCAD, occasionally MicroStation, ArchiCAD, and now there are some paid iPad options such as Shaper 3D. These days for these home projects I'll pretty much always use SketchUp. I'll draw out the measurements I've taken during the survey in 3D, and I can still create these 2D drawings from it. Some clients don't want to pay for a measured survey and supply measurements themselves, and that's fine by me. Instead, I'll just trace what they have and add the measurements as long as they realise that any discrepancies are on them. Now, after I've created a set of drawings showing the existing layout, plans and elevations, I'll start to sketch over the top and create a set of sketch options, incorporating their ideas, adding in any thoughts I think are worth them considering, with just enough detail for them to have a meaningful conversation with a trusted builder. For that, I'll charge perhaps this much, and there you go, they've got a set of drawings showing before and after with a few different options. If at that stage the project feels too expensive or they don't feel like having a working relationship with the architect, me in this case, that's fine. They at least have something to come back to at a later date, measured drawings and a design proposal. And actually, if you're following my channel for a well-informed self-builder, there's nothing stopping you making your own planning application with just these drawings and adding a few very basic notes. Now back to the main decision, how the fee is calculated, and to help you consider an architect or a draftsman planner, I'll break my fees down into these stages, and I use these percentages multiplied by the notional construction cost we calculated earlier. And because now I work on my own, my percentages are pretty keen. My only overheads are professional indemnity insurance and software licenses and the usual office expenses that all small businesses carry. I'll adjust these percentages slightly depending on the complexity of the project. If you're going to go with a bigger firm, you'll be paying more overheads, so their percentages are going to be probably higher, maybe around this much, but the work stages will be the same. I'll only take my fee up to building regulations approval. Anything more than that, well, I'm not sure that you, the well-informed homeowner or self-builder, really needs it. Homeowners can select a builder for their needs way better than me, provided they stick to the 3 golden rules: great information, great preparation and great contract. Homeowners can use the combination of a good builder and the working drawings I provide to ensure quality control on site, and if they're in doubt or their builder has some questions, I'll just charge them an hour or 2 of my time to make the odd site visit if it's required. So there's my overall fee with the breakdown, and for a typical firm of architects perhaps you'll expect to pay up to this with this breakdown. Now, what about these online drawing services or a local draftsman? Architectural drawing services. Let's look at their fees, and bear in mind they can't use the word architect since the title of architect is a protected title, indicating the person has been through 7 years of study, including design theory, building construction, on-site supervision and inspection experience. The final thing is contracts practice. Architects are also regulated by the ARB, Architects Registration Board, and they can listen to any any complaints you have. They're obliged to carry a minimum of, I think it's £250,000 now of indemnity insurance to cover for design or inspection mistakes relating to your project, and someone who's not carrying the word architect can be operating with no qualifications. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Just make sure you're aware of it, but also no obligation to carry professional indemnity insurance. There are some membership bodies, but they won't carry the weight of requirements as much as the ARB. Now let's have a look at these non-architect drawing services instead, and here's just a few that I picked off the internet. They've got all the usual stages listed, and it's all about contacting them to get a quote, sending in your stuff in these email forms. There's also plenty of local businesses offering drawing services too, and some work exclusively online without ever visiting the property, with you providing the information such as survey measurements. Once you get all the stages that you want them to do, so for example for a house extension, survey, design, planning and building regulations, as if you were using an architect, the fees will be significantly less than your local architect's fees. So the question is, why wouldn't you always just go for them and avoid the extra fees of an architect, which is probably why you're here in the first place? Well, let's have a look at some of these drawings that they're publishing as examples of their work, and let's now compare them to some typical house extension drawings that I would do for similar projects. And the thing that jumps out of the page is detail, or lack of it. When I create drawings, I'm cross-referencing and specifying all the construction details. I'm also scheduling. I mean builders' work materials, things like sills, lintels, facing bricks that match. We're scheduling the doors together, you and I, the radiators, all the stuff that makes the space and gives it its design language and its great interior design. And then I will create drawings showing the arrangement of critical construction, how the DPC sits at large scale, how the guttering works, and how it will look on the elevation. I'll go through room by room and do a finishes schedule, hardwood, skirting profiles together. You and I, we will design the lighting. And if you're just paying for the basics with a draftsperson, the problem you're going to find for yourself is instead of your build being a fixed price tender, as your builder goes through the drawings and itemises everything out, you're going to end up with an estimate of build because there's simply not enough materials and construction information for the builder to price. So he's going to have to make a load of assumptions, and those will not align with your aspirations. And instead of you getting those nice terracotta sills, for example, that might be sitting on the front of the existing elevation of your house, you look around one day halfway through the project contract all signed and find some of the cheapest concrete bottom of the range windowsills, some pretty awful tacky fake panel doors, and you're going to be living with that with the rest of your time on the property unless you pay a load of extra. Now, there is nothing wrong with getting everything from the bargain basement, but only if you know you are doing that before you commit to a builder's price. But the more information you provide, the less opportunity there are for mistakes and discrepancies with the build. And the point about the build is that it's going to cost you between 50 and 100 grand. So if you're 10% out on that, you're looking at £5,000 to £10,000, for example. However, this saving on a simple plan drawing service versus the detail of construction drawings of an architect, let's say, are maybe going to be 30 to 50%, which in the case of the fees that we've talked about, you might only be saving £1,500 to £2,000 tops on £4,500. Therefore, I would wager that £1,500 you've just saved is going to be wiped out, and some again, by that extra pain, the extra cost of the construction project. Anything up to, as we've just said, between £5,000 and £10,000 and more. If you've watched the other videos on my channel, you will know I don't particularly love architects, especially since I started building and developing over the years. Architects can take too long, and many don't know how to communicate at all to their customers, and certainly not to builders. I have gone into detail in my other videos about how you can manage a lot of what they can do yourself, but by all means go for the cheapest option for your design and planning permission drawings, provided you are an experienced self-builder or a really highly organised individual with your lists of requirements to pad out the basic drawings you get, or have a very, very simple project. Anyway, in that case, I would say don't even bother with someone to do the plans, because it's so easy just to do these drawings yourself these days using SketchUp, as I've shown in many of my other videos, and more power to you. Hopefully, if you're watching these videos, you'll be considering doing some or most of the work yourself, including perhaps some of the design drawing work, in order to keep the cost down and to be part of creating something wonderful with your own hands. But for the less experienced self-builders and homeowners, the savings you make by doing the design and permissions on the cheap always, and I mean always, end up costing you far more overall through increased build costs. Don't do it. Pay the extra and get that detail done to give you the power with your builder. Hit me a thumbs up, it really helps me, and I'll see you soon.